This is the opening reading for the 13th Annual Villanova Literary Festival, and I'm very excited tonight to have Monique Truong here this evening. I'm Alan Drew. I'm the director of the Literary Festival. Before I begin tonight, I need to thank a lot of people. I'd like to thank, first off, all of you for coming. Obviously, I just did that. But I thank all the students and faculty for their excitement and engagement. Without you guys, it would obviously be impossible to pull this festival off. So thank you again for being here. I'd particularly like to thank the College of the Arts and Sciences and all my colleagues in the English department. Without your support, without getting the students reading the books, without getting them excited about the books, we wouldn't have a festival. So thank you very much, and thank you also for being here this evening. Lastly, I need to thank all our co-sponsors who not only offer much needed financial support, but also helped to get the word out about the events. And those co-sponsors are Irish Studies, Gender and Women's Studies, Africana Studies, Falvey Library, the Honors Program at the Writing Center, and Modern Languages and Literature. Before I turn the official honors to Colin and Joey to do the introduction tonight, I just want to remind you that this is the first reading of the festival, and we have 4 more throughout the spring. So write this down, go get dates, bring them. On February 17th, we have, which is next Thursday, we have the 2010 National Book Award winner in poetry, Terrence Hayes, coming here. On March 10th, we have the 2009 National Book Award winner in fiction, Colin McCann. And we have on March 24th, poet Eleanor Wilner, and fiction writer John Haskell on April 12th. If you need more information about the readings, please go to the English department website, and they'll tell you where the readings are happening. All the times are 7 o'clock, and they're all free. After the reading, there'll be a Q&A, so please have your questions ready to go. And there will be a book signing as well after the reading. And I believe the books arrived, yes. I managed to run off without the books, but Lisa got the books, so Dr. Silva, yeah, we'll find one. We'll put somewhere back here for the books. Please go ahead and buy one and stick around and get your book signed. There are brownies up here, there's fruit up here, there are drinks, it's all free. Please come and get it after the reading and hang out for a little while. I've also put a sign-up sheet back here, there's a little podium back here. We're trying to put together a list of, like an email list of people we can contact for future festivals to get the word out. So if you're so inclined and you don't mind having your email on some part of my desk in my office that I can send out to you notices about future readings, please go ahead and put your name down in their email, and it will help us to sort of build a large audience beyond Villanova. And after you leave even, you can come back and join us again. So again, thank you for coming out, and I'm going to turn it over to Colin and Joey, who will do the official introductions.
We are very honored to welcome Monique Truong. Obviously a brilliant writer, having read her book, but I'm also honored because as a class, we met Ms. Truong today, and she's a very kind person and was very willing to share all the insights and secrets, if you will, about writing, which we were very fortunate to hear. I'm going to do a short bio to give you a little familiarity, and then Joey's going to talk about Better in the Mouth a little bit. Monique Truong was born in Saigon, South Vietnam, and is currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Her first novel, The Book of Salt, published by Houghton Mifflin in 2003, was a national bestseller, a New York Times notable fiction book, and the recipient of the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award. Also the Bard Fiction Prize, the Stonewall Book Award, Barbara Gittings Literature Award, a Penn Oakland Josephine Miles National Literary Award, an Association for Asian American Studies Poetry Prose Award, and a 7th Annual Asian American Literary Award. Truong is also a contributing co-editor of Watermark, an anthology of Vietnamese American poetry and prose, Asian American Writers Workshop 1998. She has contributed to the New York Times, Saveur, Food and Wine, Real Simple, Town and Country, Condé Nast Traveler, Allure, and other publications. Truong was a Penn Robert Bingham Fellow, Princeton University's Hodder Fellow, and a 2010 Guggenheim Fellow. She is a graduate of Yale University and Columbia University School of Law. According to the Los Angeles Times, Truong's bone is the outsider's play, and her pen is a scalpel, laying perfect words down along that nerve until the happiest reader understands what it means to forever stand apart from your family and the larger society you inhabit. I'm going to hand things over to Joe.
I'll tell you the easy things first, as Truong says in her second novel, Bitter in the Mouth. Bitter in the Mouth was named a 25 best fiction books by Barnes & Noble and a 10 best fiction books by Hudson Booksellers. Jane Ain Phillips of Lark and Termite described the book as a revelation of wit and heart and stunning talent. The book's protagonist, Linda Hammerick, is an adopted Asian American who has synesthesia, a disease that allows her to taste words. Linda struggles with her identity, and this novel explains what it's like growing up Asian in the South. Identity plays an enormous role in this novel, even though the reader does not discover Linda's race until about halfway through. Yet for Linda, her identity as an Asian is not revealed to us immediately on purpose. Linda may be Asian in the South, but she did not grow up Asian in the South per se. Diane White of the Boston Globe hits the nail on the head when she writes, "Linda never felt she belonged. Linda truly was an outsider for reasons that emerge as the story progresses." Truong herself claimed she wanted to invite an unreliable reader, but the unanswered questions only add to the novel in its entirety. By deliberately leaving the reader in the dark, she's truly able to tell the reader what it's like to grow up Asian in the South, or not. Truong gives the reader a coat of many colors and asks the reader to see which best suits Linda and himself. Eventually, the reader discovers all of Linda's secrets, but like our own lives, sometimes what's easy is not always what's important. So please welcome award-winning author Monique Truong.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? It's very much like reading in a giant Starbucks in here. So I'm really bad about moving my head around when I'm reading to, but just know I'm reading to you, okay? Thank you so much for the introductions. It's always at the intro that I get nervous, because I'm like, oh my God, did I really, say that, or did I really do that? But thank you. I'm gonna just begin with just a couple of words of introduction, and then I'm gonna read to you from 2, maybe 3 places in the book. Okay. I consider myself a Southern girl twice over. What I mean by that is that I was born in Saigon, South Vietnam, and I grew up in Boiling Springs, North Carolina. Most people don't know the latter fact about me. But if you ever heard my mom speak, you would hear her Southern accent clear as a bell. You would also hear the twang of her South Vietnamese accent. And I can assure you, the combination of the two is unique. In the summer of 1975, my family arrived in Boiling Springs, and for the next 3 years, we would call this very small southern town our home. Our first after coming to the US as refugees from the Vietnam War. For the past 7 years, I've essentially returned to this small town of Boiling Springs for inspiration and for the locale of my second novel. Bitter's main character, Linda Hammerick, has a neurological condition that causes her to taste words. When I first heard about this condition, I thought, fantastic. Because I thought it would be, if she said the word apple, she would taste sort of that beautiful sort of sweetness of a tree-ripened Macintosh. And I thought if she said the word caramel, she would taste, that incredible richness of a piece of caramel candy. But as I did more research on her condition, I realized that this form of synesthesia is not all apples and caramel. First, the flavors of the words rarely correspond to the meaning of the words. So, for example, if she said the word apple, she could taste, let's say, the taste of black pepper. Also, as you can see from that example, the flavors that are triggered by the words are not always the most pleasant ones. I have to admit I was disappointed, but then I became obsessed with this idea of living with a difference that is so profound and so self-defining, and yet it's a difference that no one else can see, that you can keep as a secret. When you first meet Linda, you hear about her condition. She tells you about it. She calls it her secret sense. But the thing is, you don't find out until much later in the book that there are other traits, other physical traits, that set her apart from her family and her community. So as Linda Hammerick would tell us, we keep secrets to protect, but the one most shielded from shame, from judgment, from the slap in the face, are ourselves. We are selfish in our secret keeping and rarely altruistic. We act out of instinct and survival, and only when we feel safest will we let our set of facts be known. Linda's condition is, to me, ultimately a vivid example of the differences that define us versus the differences that other define us by. And it's really the tension between these two that is at the heart of Bitter in the Mouth. Okay, that's my intro. I'm going to begin at the beginning. I fell in love with my great uncle Harper because he taught me how to dance. He said that rhythm was allowing yourself to feel your blood coursing through you. He told me to close my eyes and forget the rest of my body. I did, and we bopped our non-existent selves up and down and side to side. He liked me because I was a quiet child. He showed me photographs of himself as a boy. He referred to himself in the third person. This here is Harper Evan Birch, he would say. The boy in those photographs was also a quiet child. I could tell from the way that his arms were always flat by his side, never akimbo or raised high to the North Carolina sky. We were both compact, always folding ourselves into smaller pieces. We both liked music because it was a river where we stripped down, jumped in, and flailed our arms around. It was 1975 then, and the water everywhere around us was glittery with disco lights. My great uncle Harper and I, though, danced to Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Fats Domino. We twisted, mashed potatoed, and winked at each other whenever we opened our eyes. My great uncle Harper was my first love. I was 7 years old. In his company, I laughed out loud. I'm not ashamed to admit that I have tried to find him in the male bodies that I lie next to, and that I see him now only when I turn off the lights. His bow tie undone, hanging around his shirt collar, modest isosceles triangles considering the fashion at the time. His pants cuffed and creased, his graying hair cut the same as when he was a boy, a wedge of it hanging over one eye, the other one a blue lake dappled by the sun. My great uncle Harper wasn't where I thought I would begin. But a family narrative should begin with love. Because he was my first love, I was spared the saddest experience in most people's lives. My first love and my first heartbreak were dealt by different pairs of hands. I was lucky. My memories of the two sensations, one of my heart filling and one of it emptying, were divided and lodged in separate bodies. I can still recall the feeling that came over me when my great uncle Harper first placed the record needle on the spinning 45. It happened right away. I felt that everything deep within my body was rising to the surface, that my skin was growing thin, that I would come apart. If this sounds painful, it wasn't. It was what love did to my body, which was to transform it. I would come apart like a fireworks display, a burst of light that would grow larger and glow and make the person below me say, ah. I remembered saying my great uncle's name aloud. This memory of my first love was then safe from all that was to come. I'll tell you the easy things first. I'll use simple sentences, so factual and flat, these statements will land in between us like playing cards on a table. My name is Linda Hammerick. I grew up in Boiling Springs, North Carolina. My parents were Thomas and Deanne. My best friend was named Kelly. I was my father's tomboy. I was my mother's baton twirler. I was my high school's valedictorian. I went far away for college and law school. I live now in New York City. I miss my great Uncle Harper. But once these cards have been thrown down, there are bound to be distorting overlaps. The head of the Queen of Spades on the body of the King of Clubs. The Joker's bowed legs beneath a field of hearts. I grew up in Thomas and Kelly. My parents were valedictorian and baton twirler. My best friend was named Harper. I was my father's New York City. I was my mother's college and law school. I was my high school's tomboy. I went far away for Thomas and Deanne. I live now in Boiling Springs. I miss Linda Hammerick. The only way to sort out the truth is to pick up the cards again, slowly, examining each one. So I'm going to skip ahead just a couple of pages, still the first chapter. And this section is, we'll give you a little bit more about Linda's great Uncle Harper. And within the family, he's known as Baby Harper. And I think as a novelist, I'm not supposed to acknowledge this, but he is my favorite character in this book. So here goes. My grandmother Iris's funeral was delayed by a week because of the flowers. After her second heart attack, Iris had told us that she wanted magnolias on her coffin, boughs and boughs of them, a cascading river of glossy green leaves with brown suede undersides, creamy blossoms the size of soup bowls floating among them. Iris didn't go into such details, but that was how my great Uncle Harper had envisioned the flowers when his sister told him what she expected. But in the middle of February, There weren't any magnolias to be had in Boiling Springs or anywhere else in the state of North Carolina. The florists in nearby Shelby had to special order them from a wholesaler in New York City, who had to wait for a midweek shipment from somewhere in South America before the branches could be overnighted to Boiling Springs in a box almost as large as my grandmother's coffin. Baby Harper, that was what my grandmother had called her little brother since the day he was born, and that was 63 years ago by then. Baby Harper made all the funeral arrangements, and he would be the first to say that the flowers were the most complex and challenging part of it all. He took copious notes, do's and don'ts, for when his day came. Do. Have the wake at the Cecil T. Brandon Home of Eternal Rest. Asked for the, quote, dignified departure package. Don't waste money on real flowers. One dead thing is enough. Do. Use a caterer from Asheville. See folder labeled, quote, victuals for phone numbers and addresses. Don't place an order for the deviled eggs. They are delicious, but the old people will pass gas. My great uncle made a folder for his notes, showed it to me, and then alphabetized it in his personal files under the letter T for the end. Before his retirement, my great uncle Harper was a librarian at Gardner-Webb Baptist College, the intellectual hub of Boiling Springs. At work, his methodology was conventional and efficient, but that wasn't the case in his own home. His books were shelved in alphabetical order, but not by titles. The letter A for acerbic. The letter B for buy another copy as gift. The letter C for cow dung, as in this stinks. The letter D for devastating. E for explore further. F for foreign. Foreign meant my great uncle couldn't relate to the characters in the book, not that the author was from another country, and so on. He would explain the system to me and give me typewritten pages identifying all 26 categories. This and his The End folder would be the closest documents to a will that Baby Harper would ever prepare. When Iris passed away, my great uncle Harper had never left the continental United States, and the acquisition of the magnolias for her coffin made him think about places in the world even more southern than where he was born and raised. That thought sent him to the bookstore, where he bought a couple of travel guides and a novel, 100 Years of Solitude. Baby Harper filed these books under E for explore further. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to a chapter that, well, the passage is really about how Linda begins to understand that her condition can be used for pleasure. And I think the only thing that you need to know to understand this passage is that one of the great challenges for me about this narrative was that I needed to find a way to represent the word and flavor combination, meaning the word and the flavors that that word would trigger. And how would I do it within this, on the written page, on the written word on the page? Basically what I decided was that I would, in quoted dialogue, I would have the word and then the flavor right next to the word, no space, in italics. So it works, I think, fine, except that when I try to read these passages aloud, because it's very hard to read in italics. So I think the only combination you'll hear, and I'm going to tell you what it is so it doesn't sound so jarring when it happens, is the word again, which makes her taste pancake, no syrup. Okay, so here it goes. Do you guys need a latte, cappuccino, anything? No? All right. I have just learned the trick of stringing together words to produce the taste that I wanted. I was particularly fond of this thread: walnut, elephant, candle, jogger. These words brought forth the following in this satisfying order: ham steak, sugar-cured and pan-fried; sweet potatoes, baked with lots of butter; 7-Up, though more the lime than the lemon, like when it's icy cold; fresh strawberries, sweet and ripe. Growing up with Deanne for a mother, I could count on one hand the times when I had a really good meal like that. Every once in a while, an ingredient would slip past Deanne's fingers unspoiled. Fresh strawberries, for example. During the summers, my great-uncle Harper and I would go to the pick-your-own farms in the nearby town of Kings Mountain, and the berries that we brought back were so red, perfect, and fragrant that even Deanne left them alone. That was perhaps my favorite memory of my mother, her walking out of the kitchen with a cut glass bowl full of strawberries. A bowl of Cool Whip would be waiting at the table for them. But I never touched the stuff, not after baby Harper called it edible shaving cream. I didn't understand until I had left Boiling Springs, and specifically the sphere of influence of Deanne's kitchen, why so many of the incomings of my childhood were mildly unpleasant, bland, or unremarkable at best. The reason was disarmingly simple. The experiential flavors had to come first. Once the memories of them, of the canned, the frozen, the surprise, the a la king, had lodged themselves in my brain, then and only then could these tastes attach themselves to the words in my vocabulary without cause or consideration for the meanings of the words. I, too, had to disregard the meanings of the words if I wanted to enjoy what the words could offer me. At first, the letting go of meaning was a difficult step for me to take, like loosening my fingers from the side of a swimming pool for the very first time. The world suddenly became vast and fluid. Anything could happen to me as I drifted toward the deep end of the pool, but without words resourceful and revealing, who would know the dangers that I faced? I would be defenseless. I would drown. Maybe all children felt this way. We grab onto words because we thought they could save us. Mama got us a pair of hands, a bosom to hide our faces in. Papa got us a lift skyward, a perch on a shoulder. Maybe our first words all had the same meaning. Save me. A plea that, if answered, reinforced our desire to acquire more, to amass a vocabulary that could be our arsenal against the unknown terrors of life. To let go of meaning was to allow for the possibility that words didn't hold within them this promise of salvation, or because of my misuse of the words, I alone wouldn't be saved. Of course, I was afraid. The first time I did it, it was out of necessity. I was hungry, and the casserole du jour was chicken a la king, my least favorite in Deanne's rotation. As she scooped it onto our plates, she announced its name as if we had never seen this dish before. As usual, there were gray slices of canned mushrooms to which the thick, dun-colored sauce refused to adhere. A repulsion on a molecular level, perhaps. The sauce stuck to the egg noodles and the chicken pieces instead, lending its gluey, spongy texture to both the starch and the meat. I excused myself from the dinner table to go wash my hands, and then I, a skinny 11-year-old, sat on the edge of the bathtub and blurted out, "Not again. Pancake, no syrup." There it was, sustenance, simple, without sauce. Each repetition of the word again was a revelation. The faster I said it, the more intense and mouth-filling the taste became. Each repetition was a restitution for past meals suffered. Each repetition was an inoculation for future meals to be endured. I wanted to see how many times I would have to say the word in order to approximate the feeling of being full. I flipped on the bathroom fan so that no one would hear. But soon, a knock on the bathroom door and my father's voice saying my name in the form of a question made me stop short. Why hadn't I stumbled on this simple solution before? I had edged close to it. I had learned that the word could diminish and deflect. I was slower to understand that the word could also fulfill and satisfy. But let me ask this question. How old were you when you first touched yourself for the sake of pleasure? Your body and its attendant parts were always there, were they not? But we all have to learn how to use what we were born with for something other than the functional and the obvious. All of our bodies hold within them secret chambers and cells. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions on this book or on my first, which was called Book Assault. Oh, hello. Hello again. I know the answer to that question as much as you do as a reader. I really do try to leave my characters in a place with, I suppose if you want to be optimistic, you would say infinite possibilities, but perhaps just, at a place where they could take many different roads. I think it's more interesting that way. I want them to have a life within the imagination of the people who encounter them. Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yeah?
Okay. Can you talk about, perhaps not your personal relationship, but your writer's relationship to food and taste, and how that has become a vocabulary for describing a whole range of experiences?
Well, thanks for giving me the out of not having to talk about my personal relationship with food, but I'm perfectly happy to do it. I freely admit that I'm completely obsessed with food. When I'm having breakfast, I'm thinking about what I'm having for lunch, But, I have to say that one of the things that I had to really think about, especially with the first book, which is about a young gay Vietnamese man who worked as a live-in cook for Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, and set in Paris in the late 20s, early 30s. And a lot of that is descriptions of food, and it's meant to entice, to invite you in. One of the things that is very specific to who I am is that, or I should back up and say, Asian American writers, the history of Asian American literature is very fraught when it comes to the writing of food. It was, I think, initially used and seen as a way to make culture more consumable, less threatening, all of that. And rightfully so, Asian Americanists have always critiqued that kind of writing about food. So as an Asian American author who is interested in food and who wants to write about food, I had to really, that was the context. I had to know my history, and that was the history. And my adding to that tradition of, love my food, love my culture, love me, kind of, or am I doing something that is actually breaking, different grounds? And I think for me, what I decided was that food, especially in the first book, is very much about memory and time travel almost. Sometimes the quickest way to bring you back to a moment, to a place, is a flavor. And especially for immigrants, for migrants, for anyone living far from home, food is that instantaneous connection, right? And yet, ironically, especially in the big cities now, in the back of every kitchen is an immigrant. Folks who can't get, who are very far from home, who can't get citizenship, who can't get any form of assistance. You have to say to yourself that there is something a little perverse that you will allow people to touch your food, to touch everything that you're going to put into your mouth, and yet these are the same folks that, health insurance, God forbid, or or educating their children, God forbid, you know, all these things. I mean, the whole irony of that whole sort of the economics of food, you know, and food preparation and food service, for me, is very political. So I tried to hone in on that and try to really sort of have that inform my narrative. That's less so with Bitter in the Mouth, certainly. But still, I mean, I think for me, it was, you know, I think that one of the things that happens, hopefully, in Bitter in the Mouth is that when you first meet Linda, you're not, you know, you hear about her family. It was obviously a Southern white family. And there are certain assumptions that I invite you to make about the ethnicity and the race of Linda. And you get to know her. I think most people get to know her with the assumption that she is a white girl, a white American girl. You know, and there is all these connections that can be made from the flavors that she experiences, which are it's so much about the process, kind of terrible food that Americans ate in the mid-70s. You know, that's when I came here, and food was just awful. You know, I mean, I think obviously, I mean, if you were living in one of the big metropolis, you know, it would be different. But when you're talking about small town America, it was very much about the frozen, the can, and the process, you know. But again, that becomes a vocabulary in its own way, you know, for making a connection with Linda. That's very different than making some sort of connection about her race, her exterior, her anything. You know, it's something. It's a different platform for doing so. And I need you as the writer of this narrative to make these kind of connections with her first. And then when we find out how she inhabits the world, then you can start to say, okay, Linda and I are not similar, or Linda and I are similar, you know, and so on. So that was a long response, but I love talking about food, so. Yes.
I'd like to move to a different taste, from taste to sound. Book of Salt, you're dealing with dialogue and interior monologues of transplanted Americans, as well as the young man did, who's a native of Vietnam. And then you shift on your latest book to North Carolina. And I'm just curious, as a writer, how do you train the ear? Is it memory? Or is it self-conscious attention to accents? What's the creative blend that goes with that?
Right. I think that part of that training is really goes back to the way that I grew up in Boiling Springs, actually, which is I learned very early on to make myself as invisible as possible and to be as quiet as possible, because otherwise I would be, you know, more of a target than I was. And obviously I wish I hadn't grown up that way, but the thing that it did teach me was to listen, and to listen very carefully. The thing that about dialogue, though, which I find it's incredibly, and I think this is very personal to me as a writer, I find it incredibly refreshing as a writer to when I hit a section in the novel where I'm writing dialogue. I think maybe perhaps it's because I'm storing up a lot of these things. And it's a release of sort. is it memory? Yeah, certainly memory. But, you know, like, I haven't lived in the South for a very, very long time. And when I was writing this, I found that one of the things that really helped me was to listen to Southern music, to country music, basically, but not like the contemporary country music, but just kind of, you know, sort of more folk kind of stuff. And to hear the cadence again. So it's ongoing. It's not just memory. It's you know, and kind of an ongoing tuning in to what's surrounding. Yes?
I was wondering about your choice as a writer to use a real town that you grew up in as kind of the setting for the novel. I know that, I guess it's kind of a trend, like when you read a book and you know that, you know, like the author might have certain characteristics with the character, you kind of assume that like there's some amount of autobiographical element to it. So I guess like, I guess how did you choose to like lead Boiling Springs as an actual, you know, Boiling Springs, I guess?
Right. I think that when life gives you a town called Boiling Springs and makes you live there, you get to write about it. That was, you know, and you know, part of it has to do actually with the fact that when I started this book, I think I really started the book from a place that was much more angry. You know, I was angry at the South, you know, and the way that I grew up there. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna write my take on this town. I'm gonna tell a story about this place, right? But it took me so long to write it that by the time I was done, I don't think I was angry anymore. And I think that and I actually went back to Boiling Springs, you know. And it really, I think what it did was it with the, it's very different from saying I've forgotten. It's more of a dissipation of what I had felt previously. And I think what it did was it allowed me to step back and look at the other people in that town and to try to understand what their story was. And I think that that's why Linda's mom emerges from, you know, from a place where you feel like she is the most sort of, you know, just uncaring mother, to a point where you could actually understand how that initial relationship was, you know, constructed in that way, the emotional components of it. And you know what, I was actually, that was the thing that made me the most apprehensive when I was publishing this book. Like, what, you know, what was North Carolina gonna say? And I've gotten some really just amazing reviews from newspapers in North Carolina, from, you know, reporters who've called me up and said, you know, that they used to work at the Shelby Star, which is a newspaper that I mentioned in the book. They've actually tracked down the real Kelly, who was my best friend growing up there, found her email. We're in contact again. I mean, you know, so you never know what's going to happen. You just have to go with your gut when it comes to something like that. And if it seems like it's really scary and potentially dangerous, you know, to do, it's probably right. Not in all things in life, just in writing. Any other questions? No? Yeah? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much.